basically the last thing you want to do is raise questions. Right. So appraisers, for some strange reason, think boilerplate covers their assets. No, it doesn't. In fact, it just causes more questions to be raised. So word to the wise, write your own scope of work.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Appraiser Coach Podcast. My name is Dustin Harris. I want to introduce you. If you are new to the program, welcome. I'm glad you joined us. If you are old to the program, welcome back. We today have our favorite guest, Mr. Tim Andersen. I'll introduce him in just a moment, as we have this series called the Dear USPAP Instructor, where your questions are answered live and in person, if you will. First, I want to dive into our sponsors. Of course, we are sponsored by three great companies, one of them being your E&O company, which should be OREP Insurance. If it's not, check them out. Go to orep.org. Let me spell that one more time, orep.org, and you will find that they are the best company out there. Check them out, orep.org. We are sponsored by DataMaster. Of course, DataMaster is helping to save appraisers time, and that means like 30 to 40 minutes per report. That is a pretty hefty number, folks. Check them out. Go to Datamaster USA. You got to put that USA at the end. Sometimes people get confused. Datamasterusa.com. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. And a la mode, of course, is the software of choice for me and my form filling, and of course, my office. We've got a great setup where everybody can kind of log into the same program, which means we share our quick lists and our photos and our comps database and our files and everything else. It's really cool, and a la mode allows us to do that. It's a great company. Alamode.com, ALAMODE.com, or 800-ALAMODE. Well, I teased it, and now I'm going to officially introduce my good friend, Mr. Tim Andersen. He is a USPAP instructor, a USPAP expert in the state of, he comes to us from the state of Florida, been a longtime appraiser and MAI, wonderful guy. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Tim Andersen.
Dustin, thank you. I appreciate it. It's an honor, as always, to be with you. And of course, I extend my best to you and all of your family.
Thank you, my friend. Just to set this up, we on a regular basis, try on a monthly, it doesn't happen all the time, but most of the time on a monthly basis, we get together to talk about your questions. And specifically, I'm very open about my insecurities, and one of those being USPAP. I am not a USPAP instructor. I'm not a USPAP expert by any stretch. Whenever I get one of these tough questions, I'll defer to my friend Tim or some of the others out there. But Tim is one of the best. He knows his stuff. And so when questions come in from my listeners or from the All-Star team, we typically put those to Tim. By the way, if you are one that asks a question of us, either to email me, which is thecoach@theappraisercoach.com, or Tim at, give me your email address again, Tim.
Dustin, it's Tim@theappraisersadvocate.com.
I thought that was it, but I wanted to make sure we got it right. But whenever these questions come in, we answer them immediately. When I say immediately, within a day or two. But then on the ones that we think are specifically relevant to other appraisers, then we save those, of course. Again, we answer your question right away. Don't be fearful that we won't get to your question. But then we ask your permission if we're able to put those on the air. And most of the time that permission is given, or else we do them anonymously so that your integrity can be intact. And we got a couple of questions over the last little bit that I want to tackle here today. So Tim, let's dive into the first one. I'm not going to read it word for word. I don't think I need to, but we had an All-Star team member reach out, and I'm just going to sum it up. The question basically is saying, this idea of USPAP, and specifically USPAP talks about scope of work. And of course, this goes to report writing and how we describe our scope of work. Is the printed forms, the pre-printed forms, the 1004, the 2055, the 1025, the 1075, we could name others that are Fannie Freddie forms. Is that good enough, Tim, for the scope of work? Because there is scope of work in there.
No. What else do you want to know?
All right. Question number 2.
Dustin, the answer is no, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. The issue is USPAP says very clearly, this is not my interpretation, this is very clear, that the appraiser must describe what it is he or she did to come up with a credible value opinion, and then report it non-misleadingly. Mm-hmm. And what you have in the boilerplate scope of work is something that says along the lines of the appraiser must, at a minimum, A, B, C, D, and E. which does not explain in the least what it is the appraiser did or did not do to come up with a credible value opinion.
Okay.
So as a result, the boilerplate is not only wrong, it's also potentially misleading.
Which is
and
a big deal with USPAP.
State appraisal boards. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That word misleading, that's kind of a big deal with USPAP.
Oh, we can go into that if you want to.
No, I'm just saying,
right now,
if you're saying it's potentially misleading, that's probably something we need to avoid.
We
misleading.
would generally be well advised to avoid misleading. Yeah. So the scope of work is, see, a lot of appraisers think, well, I do the same thing every time. Well, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But the point is, you don't do exactly the same thing every time. One appraisal, you're doing a cookie cutter house in a cookie cutter neighborhood, you're probably just going to need 3 comps. And in fact, if it's a cookie cutter house in a cookie cutter neighborhood, you may already have the data in your work file. So as a result, you're going to whip that one out in a hurry. And you would basically say, hey, I went to my files because I didn't have to go anywhere. I had all the other stuff. But then, okay, Dustin, I was listening to one of your podcasts extremely recently in which you talked about the go away fee.
Mm-hmm.
And you told the story of that one particular house and you just wanted it to go away. Right. So you said, okay, tell them I want $6,500. They'll walk away. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They didn't walk away. They wrote a check. Yep. Okay. So the point is that was most likely not a cookie cutter. So as a result, the scope of work narrative would be significantly longer.
Gotcha.
What you did and what you didn't do, and who you talked to and what you talked about.
Right.
So the boilerplate scope of work is probably a great place to start. It might even be a great place to end, but it's not in and of itself adequate. The preprinted scope of work doesn't really tell anybody anything about what it is you did or didn't do to come up with a credible value opinion. That is incumbent on the appraiser to write. Originally, it should be original prose.
Right.
And when you do that, then the state appraisal board looks at that and goes, oh, okay, Tom or Bill or Fred or Jane or Sally or whoever obviously knows what it is they're doing. Okay, good. We'll move on to the next issue. Whereas when they read the boilerplate that they have read in every other appraisal report that's ever come up before them, they go, when we read this before, we found other issues to worry about, which just means that they're going to start asking more questions. And when your report is sitting there in the hands of the state appraisal board, basically the last thing you want to do is raise questions. Right. So appraisers, for some strange reason, think boilerplate covers their assets. No, it doesn't. In fact, it just causes more questions to be raised. So word to the wise, write your own scope of work.
Tim, I appreciate that. And that is great advice. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball to you because we didn't talk about this prior to coming on the air. But your statement and your great description of what scope of work is and how much we need to put in brings up another question that sometimes comes my direction. And that is, and I'm just going to paraphrase a question here, how much leeway do we have as appraisers to quote unquote change the scope of work that's already on the pre-printed form? Let me explain. We are knee deep in COVID and the pandemic and such, and I know that one of the things that happened with some of the GSEs, including Fannie Mae, was during the pandemic, because they didn't want appraisers in homes, they were still using the 1004, which very clearly states that the appraiser inspected both the interior and the exterior of the subject, but they were supplementing that 1004 with basically opposite information. Basically saying, no, I did a COVID exterior, or I did a desktop. I did not go into the home. So then you've got the problem of with a pre-printed form, it's static, right? You can't change it. And yet we had, at least during the pandemic, we had this supplemental scope of work, if you will, that said, basically ignore that certification that's on the form because I did not walk into the property. I drove by, or I did everything from my desktop. How much leeway would a state board give in this situation? How much leeway does USPAP give if you've got a situation where the form says one thing and yet your scope of work says, not quite. I did things a little bit different.
Dustin, in my opinion, the hottest circles of hell, the ones with the most jagged edges and the most pieces of sharp glass around its boundaries, is going to be reserved for those cretins who wrote the 1004 form. And it's simply because it sucks. All right. Yep. There is no other way around it. It absolutely sucks. And they have said, oh, the 1004 form is scripture. You can't change it. Well, that's crap. And I would use a more colorful term having to do with barnyard ground cover, but I know that you have to get these things on YouTube and you have to say that they're child safe, so I won't use the term.
Thanks.
But the point is, it's not up to the GSEs to tell us how to tell them what we did. It's up to us how to tell them what we did.
Got it.
Now, the scope of work is pre-printed and you can't change it, but you can modify it.
Got it.
And that's what we do. Now, this thing about COVID where it says in place A that we went in and we looked around and we had coffee and we baked a loaf of bread and we chatted and blah, blah, blah.
Well, your inspections
but then we also say, but then later in the appraisal report, we said, no, hell, I didn't even go in a house. Obviously, that's a terrible conflict, but yet the GSEs know what's going on. So, okay, they just buy the conflict. And the state boards are not making an issue out of it. So that's really not a big deal. But the point is the GSEs are telling us how to appraise, and that's not the way things are supposed to work.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Yeah, I love that. Man, that was the statement of the decade right there. Exactly right. We're talking with Tim Andersen. He is a USPAP instructor. He also helps appraisers as an advocate to be on your side when you are faced with some issues regarding state board issues. We'll talk a little bit about that with him when we come back from the break. And also another question from another listener as we dive into how what we do on a regular basis reflects on or has to do with, of course, staying competent and in line with our code of ethics, which of course is USPAP. I want to pause here, remind you that we're sponsored by 3 great companies. One of them is my E&O company. Now, folks, I want to tell you that about 4 or 5 years ago, I was approached by this company. I absolutely had no reason to switch. And I told that company, they approached me and said, we want to be your E&O company. And I said, I don't have any problem with my E&O company. Their answer, and of course, I'm paraphrasing, is, well, look at us because I think you might change your mind. And I did. I took a look at what they had to offer, and I was very impressed. And I've been very impressed every single year to where I don't even shop around anymore. I go directly to the broker, and that broker is OREP. OREP.org is where you go to start an application to change. If you are up for E&O renewal, and even if you're not, check them out. Go to orep.org. Again, it's OREP.org. Alamode, of course, is the software that I've been using for decades, literally over 2 decades. I've been using Alamode. My father, who was my mentor, was using Alamode before that. Folks, there is a reason that it is the leader in form filling software for residential appraisers. There's a reason you should be there if you are with any other company. I know it can be hard. Well, I've been with this company forever. Do I really want to switch? Folks, I've helped many people to do it. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I will tell you it is a process, but I will absolutely testify that it is worth it. Alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE to find out more information. And of course, if you want to save money, one of the great things that I teach in my coaching side of things is to save time and to use technology to help you to save that time. Folks, how would you like a software program that can do data entry for you? You don't have to hire it out or do it yourself. That's what DataMaster does for you, in addition to other things it will do for you. Check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com. One more time, it's datamasterusa.com. All right, folks, welcome back to the program. We're talking with my good friend, Mr. Tim Andersen, and we are doing a Dear USPAP Instructor program today, a little episode on where we answer your questions. Tim, I want to pause here and just get out to the listeners, if they don't know this about you, that you, the reason you're called the Appraiser's Advocate is why?
Well, I found some time ago, Justin, that appraisers were being called up in front of their state boards having no clue what to do or how to do it. And one of the first things I tell folks is, okay, you need an administrative law attorney because this is not appraising anymore. This is no legal stuff. I'm not an attorney, so I can't represent them legally. But one of the things I do is I advocate for appraisers by saying, look, before you're in trouble with the state, why don't you send me some of your reports? I'll go over them with USPAP compliance and we'll sit down and talk. And I'll be happy to show you the strong points, and I'll be happy to show you the weak points. And that way you can leverage the high points and get rid of the weak points.
Love it.
And I found that a lot of appraisers really appreciate that service. And
I do. I've done it.
Great.
Yeah, I've done it. And
because you just admitted it, I can admit you're one of my clients. Yeah.
Well, it's a great process to go through because no matter how great you think you're doing, having somebody that is a little bit more expertise than yourself kind of, reach down, grab you and pull you up. Sometimes it can be humbling, but it will absolutely make you a better appraiser. So Tim, I appreciate that. And I would highly recommend that our listeners reach out to you to get more information. Okay, let's go to the second question, Tim. Again, I'm going to paraphrase. I don't have permission from this individual. Not that I couldn't get it. I just didn't bother because I think the question is pretty simple and straightforward, and I can paraphrase rather than out somebody, if you will. But it had to do with sketching. And really the question came back is why? And I love this question because, as you know, Tim, I'm an outside the box thinker, right? I'm constantly rethinking why we do the things that we do. As a coach, I often have somebody say, well, I've always done it that way. And I say, well, why? Let's step back. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. If you've done it that way for 30 years, it may be a great thing to be doing and to continuing. But I think that we need to ask the question, why? And this question has to do with sketching. And the question that came is, we go out we take the pictures, we gather the information, and then we sketch the property typically. It's not always, but I would say probably 90% of the appraisals that I complete are done with a sketch, with a walk around with my laser and sketching them out and putting the rooms in there and everything else. And the question came, and I know it's a funny question to a lot of listeners because they're like, well, of course you have to do a sketch. I mean, that's just part of it. But is it? Why are we doing sketches, Tim?
There's nothing in USPAP that requires a sketch. USPAP doesn't require photographs, doesn't require maps. We do that for two reasons. Number one is a courtesy, and number two, because the GSEs have said we want maps and photographs and sketches. So, okay, we do them. But no, there's absolutely nothing in USPAP requiring sketches. The old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay, you can save those 1,000 words by putting in a sketch of the house.
Right.
And some appraisers do nothing more than use the sketching software that comes with their appraisal software. Others go out and buy special apps or special equipment, and you can get mini drones that'll fly through the house and photograph it, and then give you a complete sketch, right down to the hardware in the bathroom. And
that's not a joke.
That's not going.
You're not exaggerating. That technology does exist.
Yeah, I've seen it. But do you have to? No, you certainly don't. Now, quite frankly, I would recommend that for your typical single family, first mortgage, residential GSE appraisal, you don't, include a copy of the outline from the tax assessor's office or the property appraiser's office. Whereas if you're doing divorce work or eminent domain work or ERC work, then yeah, you probably ought to have a very complete sketch. And that goes back to scope of work.
Yeah.
Why did you include a sketch? Why did you not include a sketch? But no, there's nothing in USPAP that says you got to include a sketch.
In an upcoming episode, Tim, I'm just going to tease this for the listeners. I'm going to be speaking with Hal Humphreys, who has also reached out to me on this topic. And we're going to be talking about this in regard to value. So let me ask you that, Tim. You say that USPAP doesn't require a sketch, and thus it goes to scope of work and what your client needs and what you feel is appropriate for the situation. But what about this situation? And I'm just going to set this up this way and just tell you a brief story, Tim. This morning, I'm working on a condo, well, a townhouse, I guess. It's not officially a condo, but it's a twin home, a detached home. And I went out personally and inspected the property and measured with my laser, double checked it, because when I was out there, there was some issue on the back that it didn't quite match up. So in that situation, I typically go back, I'll start maybe counterclockwise and I'll go back clockwise and fix whatever problem. And I found it. I found the problem. I fixed it. In other words, I'm pretty darn confident in my inspection. Now, is it to the nearest inch? No, but I feel like I'm within the ballpark. I measured this property or this house rather, this townhouse at 1380, and the next door neighbor, which I know is a model match, I can see it from the outside. It's exactly the same square footage, is being marketed and sold, by the way, recently within a year. It's my anchor comp, if you will. It's my best comparable. It's comp number one. But the MLS is showing 1450, and all of a sudden I've got a discrepancy. So granted, I'm not within 100 square feet difference, but I've got my subject showing 1380. I've got the next door neighbor showing 1450. I did not measure the next door neighbor. That was not my right or my privilege to do so. And so I guess the next question I would have, and this is something that Hal and I will be talking about in depth, is do we sometimes give ourselves a liability, if you will, with the market, in the sense that you've got a willing buyer and a willing seller. And by the way, this is for our purchase, the one that I'm doing. They are buying that property based on it being 1450, and it is not 1450.
Dustin, that's probably true, but then you've got to remember that the measurements that are on the tax assessor's cards or the property appraiser's office cards or whatever are done for ad valorem tax assessment purposes. Mm-hmm. They're not done for real estate appraisal purposes, and they very well may come, quite frankly, from the developer. And we are taught to measure the inside and not to include the balconies. Mm. Whereas I will guarantee you the developer measured from the outside and included the balconies.
Sure.
So it's not that we're right and they're wrong. It's just that we're different. Mm. So the issue, Dustin, what I would do if you had called me up and said, help me out, how do I solve this problem? My answer to you would be, you would disclose to the client that when you measured it, it was 1380 or whatever it is you said it was. But because the property record indicates 1450 and everybody else shows 1450, so that you have an apples to apples comparison, you're going to use 1450. Because if you use your 1380 and their 1450, now you've got an apples to aardvarks comparison. And you're probably going to have to make a size adjustment, but that size adjustment would be wrong because there really isn't a difference in size. Mm. So if you go to the HUD guide, and I can't cite you the chapter and verse, but basically HUD says, whichever basis you're going to use, your own measurements or the county measurements, fine, but then use one measurement across the subject and the comps so that you indeed have an apples to apples comparison. USPAP says absolutely nothing about it. Fannie Mae says nothing about it directly, but it's kind of silly to have to you put 1380 and everybody else puts 1450. That's the kind of thing that generates quality letters from Fannie Mae. Whereas when you say, yeah, I measured it at 1380 and my measurements are enclosed, but because everybody else has got 1450, that really doesn't affect the purchase price. It affects the purchase price per square foot, but it doesn't affect the market value and it doesn't affect the purchase price. So therefore, to keep things simple, and so not to have to explain what I did, which is exactly what I'm doing, I used the size that everybody else uses. And as long as you disclose that, that's not an issue.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, this is, sometimes I think it's good sometimes to step outside our box and what we typically do and remember that, what is the purpose of what we do? And that to me is what this speaks to, right? And sometimes that takes a little education from the appraiser to whatever client they might be working with and help them to understand that just because they've always asked for this specific thing doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that is necessary. But this is great information. Tim, thank you for your time and for your opinions. I always appreciate your sacrifices, and your vast knowledge of things is really helpful, I think, to our listeners. Once again, Tim, how do people get a hold of you if they need some assistance, if they need a question answered, or what I would highly recommend is that they get together with you for some consulting and help them to improve what it is that they're doing?
Destin, thank you. Again, my email is tim@theappraisersadvocate.com, and I will be happy to answer questions.
My pleasure, my friend. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to it. Again, folks, if you have questions, send them to Tim at the email address he just gave you, or reach out to me either through Facebook or on the email, thecoach@theappraisercoach.com. We would love to help you out. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you next time.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.